Hello, welcome to Algebra 1 with Miss Andrea. Today we're going to continue learning about solving quadratic equations. And we've learned so far about how to solve by factoring and then setting it equal to 0 and solving for that. We've also learned how to solve by completing the square. So today we're going to learn about how to solve using something called the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is a formula that, wow, I remember memorizing this in high school, and it was a big deal. They made us memorize it. And I still remember it today. I remembered it even before I got into teaching math. It's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we're going to get into a little bit what this means. And remember that when we're solving for quadratic equations are equations where you have a variable that's raised to the power of 2 or an exponent of 2 or squared. Okay. And so a quadratic equation written in standard form, you're going to have 3 terms in the expression on that has all the information, right? It's going to be set equal to 0, and all your information will be on one side. And that expression has 3 terms. And when you order it in order from the highest exponent to the lowest exponent, you're going to have the coefficient of that first term, the leading term. So this would be the leading coefficient is going to be a. And then this middle term, this middle coefficient is going to be b. And then this is our constant because there's no variable here. So this is a constant, and that's c. Now all of these, a, b, and c, will be numbers. Sometimes if you don't see a b, then b is just going to be 0. If you don't see anything with an x behind it, you can say b equals 0 if that's not there, okay? But all of these will be numbers and not variables, not letters. And then you take those numbers and you plug them into this equation down here. So b is going to go into 2 locations. A will also go into 1, 2 locations. And C only has 1 spot to fit into right there because it's a constant, so you know. Now, here we see that plus or minus sign again. Remember, what does the plus or minus sign mean? It means that there's going to be 2 answers most of the time. So right here, what's under the radical symbol is called the discriminant. And that'll tell us kind of how many answers we have or what kind of answers we have, okay? So if you have a positive number, you're going to have 2 answers. If you have a 0, you will only have 1 answer. And it's possible to have a negative as your discriminant, but then you're going to get into some imaginary numbers and complex numbers. And we're not going to get into that in this class, but remember what an imaginary number is I equals the square root of -1. So if you had something like the square root of -16 as your discriminant, okay, you're going to have 4i, you know, whatever minus b plus or minus is, and then 4i all over 2a. So that I is your imaginary number because it's the -1, because 16 is -1 times 16. So the square root of -1, the square root of 16. Square root of 16 is 4, square root of -1 is I, or imaginary. So in this unit, you don't need to worry about those complex answers. We're not going to get into that. So essentially what it is if you have a positive number under here, you're going to have 2 answers. And if you have a 0, there's only 1 answer. And that's again because of this plus or minus right here. If you have to add or subtract anything, you're going to have 2 different answers. But if you add or subtract 0, you're going to get the same answer either way. So how that works out for us. Now, let's look at this formula in action because that's really how it's going to make sense. But this formula is actually very easy to use. All you have to do is fill it in and know how to use your calculator. And that's a key component, knowing how to use your calculator. You have to know what to put into parentheses, where parentheses are important. Okay, so we'll get into that a little bit today. Here we have an equation, 5x squared plus 6x plus 1 equals 0. So the first step that we have to do is we have to identify our A, our B, and our C. I hope you wrote down that quadratic equation formula that we had there, because you're going to be using it. And all of these are positive. 5 is positive, 6 is positive, and 1 is positive. So I've got all three positives here. Remember, our quadratic equation was negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, we just have to plug all of this in. So we've got negative b. What is b? It's 6. The square root of what? B squared, 6 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 5, times c, which is 1. Then we have to put that all over 2 times a, which is 5. Okay, now is when we get into our calculator. We're just going to start plugging some stuff into the calculator, okay? There's a couple of ways I suggest doing this if you're not familiar with calculator work. The number one way I would suggest doing it is to do whatever's inside the radical or under the radical. Do that first and then rewrite your problem. So negative 6 radical, you're going to have 6 squared minus 4 times 5 times 1 equals 16. So, and then 2 times 5 is 10. So once you get here, oops, I forgot my plus or minus in here, plus or minus. So once you get here, you can kind of begin to see that it's going to be easy to solve by hand because we know what the square root of 16 was. If we didn't, we'd have to solve it by hand anyways if it was an irrational number, because we would then have to simplify. That's why I say it's a good way to start with plugging in what's under the radical, especially if you need an exact answer. Now you can plug this whole thing in, and we'll get into how to do that if you're asked to find an approximate answer, okay? So negative 6 plus or minus square root of 16 over 10 is going to be negative 6 plus 4 over 10 and negative 6 minus 4 over 10. These are going to be our two answers. We can still go ahead and simplify them some more. Negative 6 plus 4. Well, we know what that is, right? But let's plug it into our calculator. X is negative 2 over 10. And that simplifies down to negative 1/5. Okay, here we have negative 6 and negative 4 is negative 10 over positive 10, which simplifies down to negative 1. So our two answers are x equals negative 1/5 and x equals negative 1. Those are our two exact numbers. Now, none of these have irrational numbers, so our calculator would actually give us something like negative 0.2 and negative 1. So I'm going to want to go ahead and plug these and show you how you would plug this into your calculator as a complete problem. And it's going to involve a lot of parentheses. So if we look at this, you can already see where I've put some parentheses in underneath the radical sign. So those are important to include when you plug something into the calculator. Another thing you need to think about is there's implied parentheses anytime you have a fraction. So another set of parentheses is going to be right here. So you notice you have two parentheses side by side, okay? Another set of parentheses you need to think about is what's under the fraction line, okay? So the denominator, 2 times 5, that needs to be in parentheses as well. If your b here is a negative number, you would also need to have some parentheses around that before you squared it. So instead of 6, if it were negative 6, it'd have to be in parentheses like that. Okay, we have a positive number, so we're not going to worry about that at this time. So let me tell you how you would enter this into your calculator. You're going to have two equations, one with the plus sign that's right here in the middle and one with the minus sign in the middle. So you're going to do -6 plus square root, oops, I forgot. You'd already have to be backing out and deleting. You have to start with your parentheses. Parentheses, -6 plus square root, parentheses, 6 squared. And there's a squared button where you could use your caret too. -4 times 5 times 1, close parentheses, that one matches this parentheses, close parentheses again, that matches this first parentheses here. Then you're going to do divide, open parentheses, 2 times 5, and close parentheses. Now, you're going to do this again, but instead of putting a plus here, you're going to put in a minus. So that's another way to enter it into your calculator. The third way, which is the way I prefer, is just to enter -6 plus radical parentheses 6 squared minus 4 times 5 times 1 close parentheses and hit enter. And whatever that answer is, I then divide. On a calculator, it doesn't look like that. I divide by, and I do this math in my head, which, you know, is not my recommendation for most people, but usually what's on the bottom is pretty easy. 2 times 5, a lot of times A will be 1, so you're just dividing by 2. And so I take that answer and I divide by 10, because I know that using parentheses and a lot of parentheses, it's just one more opportunity to mess up. So I prefer to do it this way if I'm going to plug it into a calculator. But then again, if you have an irrational number, a decimal that never ends or repeats, you're going to have to back up and do it this way anyways, where you just plug in what's under the radical into the calculator and you figure out the rest by hand. So that's the quadratic formula. Oh, I have this in here because I wanted to show you that I don't remember what the answers are anymore, but whatever the answers were, this is where it is. When you graphed this equation right here, where the graph actually crosses the x-axis right here and right here, those are our two answers. And so that's why that works. All right, so quadratic formula here. For this one, our first step is going to be to put it in standard form. This one is not in standard form, so we have to put this into standard form. So x squared minus 10x plus 12 equals 0. Okay, so we're going to set it equal to 0. We're finding some zeros. So A is 1, B is -10, and C is 12. What's our quadratic formula? It's going to be B plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so now we need to just plug in our a, our b, and our c. In this case, it's -b plus or minus. All right, so in this case, -b is -10. So -10 plus or minus the square root of, here we go with those parentheses, -10 squared minus 4 times 1 times 12, A and C. And that extends out, and that's going to be all over 2 times 1. All right, so a negative of a negative, that's going to be what? That's going to be a positive. The opposite, remember, negative sign also just means opposite. So the opposite of a negative is a positive. So that's just going to be a positive 10. Let's see if I can erase just up. Nope. I was trying to erase just the information I didn't need. So that became a positive, just like that. Now, if you notice, because we had a -10, we have to put that inside parentheses in order to square it, because a negative, if you did -10 squared, that's going to give you -100, which is not correct. If you put it in parentheses, you'll get a positive 100, which is correct. Because remember, if you do -10 squared, what your calculator is thinking is -1 times 10 times 10, because the squared is only counting for the thing right in front of it, unless it's in parentheses. Okay, so it's not squaring the negative, so it just tags it on at the end. So you have to make sure if you're squaring or raising anything to a power, whether it's squared or, oh, I didn't mean to erase all that. Let's see. Can I redo it? Undo my erase. There we go. Whether it's squared, tripled, or quadrupled, or whatever it is, raised to the 100th power. If it's a negative number, you need to have it in parentheses. All right, so for this one, I'm going to go ahead and just do what's inside the radical here. So I'm going to go ahead and write it like this, 10 plus or minus, and then I'm going to have my radical, and I'm going to have it over 2 times 1, which is 2. And let's see what's going to go in there. So what I'm going to do is plug in my radical and open 2 parentheses. And then I'm going to put in negative 10, close one of the parentheses, and then square it. Minus 4 times 1 times 12, and I'm going to close my second parentheses. And guess what I get? I get 0. So what it looked like is square root parentheses, parentheses, negative 10, close parentheses, squared, minus 4 times 1 times 12, close parentheses. And when I hit enter, I got 0. So what does this mean? Remember what I said? If the discriminant is 0, that means we're only going to have one answer. So what's the square root of 0? It's 0. So 10 plus 0 divided by 2 is going to be 5. And 10 minus 0 divided by 2 is also 5. So x equals 5. All right, we've got another one here for us to practice. It is not in standard form, so let's go ahead and do that. 3x squared minus 2x minus 4 equals 0. A is 3, B is negative 2, and C is negative 4. Negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. All right, negative B is negative 2. So negative 2 is going to be positive 2. And I'm going to write it like this because that'll show me that I've already done the negative 2. Okay, plus or minus radical, parentheses, because I have a negative number, negative 2 squared minus 4 times A is 3 times B is negative 2. On your calculator, you have a special button for negative as opposed to minus signs. So make sure you use that. 2 times 3. So now I'm going to put this 2 plus or minus square root over 6. And I'm going to plug what's inside this radical here. I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. And so since I left my radical symbol here, I'm not going to plug in the radical. I'm just going to do negative 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 2 and see what I get. Okay. So negative 2, oops, I need some parentheses. Parentheses, negative 2, close parentheses, squared, minus 4 times 3 times negative 2 is 28. So the square root of 28. Now, 28. Let's see if I can find the square root of 28. Nope, it's an irrational number. But I bet there's something, I wonder if there's something hidden in there. So 28, let's think of 28. I know I can divide it by 2, and that would be what, 14, which is 2 times 7. So 2 times 2 times 7 is 28. So I've got a pair right there that I can move out of the house. So the square root of 28 is going to be equal to 2 square root of 7, because my pair is going to get married. 2 will become 1, and they'll move out of the house or out from under the radical. My lonely only number 7 will stay under the radical in the house with its parents. So we will have 2 plus or minus 2 square root 7 divided by 6. Now, we can reduce this, we can simplify rather, this fraction. It's over 6, so 2 over 6 can be reduced. Remember, when you have a fraction, you have an expression at the top, so something with a plus or minus in the middle. That fraction is really an addition problem. So when you have addition or subtraction with fractions, you have to have a common denominator. So this can also be written like this. But we were unable to add or subtract 2 and 2 square root of 7, so we put them together over the same denominator. It's just another way of writing this addition or subtraction problem right here when you have it just over the single denominator, because it's the same thing. So why do we need to write it 2 times? It just saves us time. But when we look at it this way, you can easily see that you have to reduce both terms. Okay, a lot of times I would see students just reducing this set of it and forgetting about the second term in the numerator. And that's going to get, that's a common mistake that you need to avoid. And so one of the ways to avoid that is to go ahead and break it up before you reduce it. So if you break it up into its 2 separate terms, 2 over 6 and 2 square root 7 over 6, then you'll be sure to reduce both of these terms separately. Okay, so 2 over 6 is the same thing as 1/3. And then we've got our plus or minus. 2 over 6 is going to be 1/3 again, but we don't need that one. It's just square root of 7 over 3. So our two answers are x equals 1/3 plus square root of 7 over 3, and x equals 1/3 minus square root of 7 over 3. Now remember, these are exact answers. If you want an approximate answer, you're going to plug this into your calculator and see what you get. So let's go ahead and do that, because we have quite a bit of fractions here. I just want to show you what it would look like. So you plug in 1 divided by 3. You don't need parentheses for that because there's no expression. It's just a single term, a constant 1 and a constant 3 on the bottom. So the calculator will automatically do the division first, right? Now, 1/3 is 1 divided by 3, and then you're going to do plus. And just like the first division problem, you do not need to do parentheses for this one either. Since there's only one item underneath the radical, you don't need parentheses for that. So you're going to do radical 7 divided by 3 and hit enter. And I got, it's approximately 1.215, etc., etc. We're just going to say 1.2. So now let's do the same thing. And again, what I'm doing is 1 divided by 3 minus radical 7 divided by 3. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do for this one right here. 1 divided by 3 minus radical 7 divided by 3 is going to be approximately negative 0.548, etc. So I'm rounding to 0.5, negative 0.5. So my exact answers are right here, circled, and the approximate answers are right here. You will be asked for both in future work, both the exact answer and the approximate. So you need to know how to find those. All right, here's another one. 3x squared minus 2x minus, this is the same one we just did. All right, on to practice. Go ahead and pause this, do it on your own, and come back. All right, welcome back. We have here this equation not in standard form, so let's put it in standard form. 2x squared plus x minus 7 equals 0. So it goes from highest exponent to lowest exponent on the variable. That's how we know it's in standard form. So a is 2, b is 1, and c is negative 7. I'm going to go ahead and write down here negative b plus my quadratic formula, plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so let's plug some stuff in. I've got negative b is 1, so I've got negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 7, all over 2 times a, which is 2. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in as negative 1 plus or minus the square root. And I'm going to put it over 4. In my calculator, I'm going to do what's in under the radical. I'm not going to include the radical, just what's under the radical. So 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 7 is, oops, and I pushed the wrong button. Let's try it again. 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 7 is 57. So I'm going to write right here 57. Now 57, I'm not sure what all is in how to simplify 57. Nothing's jumping out at me. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 7 plus 5 is 12. So I know it's going to be divisible by 3 because 12 is divisible by 3. That's a multiplication fact you should know. If you add all the numbers up that are part of a number and it sums up to something that's divisible by 3, then the original number will be divisible by 3. So 5 plus 7 is 12. So let's see, 57 divided by 3 is 19. So let's see, 57 is 3 times 19 is 9. I think 19 is prime, isn't it? Let's see. Just try some stuff out. I know it's not divisible by 2. 9 plus 1 is 10. So it's not divisible by 3. If it's not divisible by 2, it's not divisible by 4. It doesn't end in a 5 or 0, so it's not divisible by 5. If it's not divisible by 3, it's also not divisible by 6. 7, I don't think it's divisible by, but we'll give it a shot. Nope. 8, if it's not divisible by 2, it's also not divisible by 8. 9, same goes for the 3s. Yeah, I think 19 is going to be prime, so it's just 3 times 19. So we can't even simplify this at all. This is our final answer. X equals, let's say X equals, and that's our final answer. You would have two answers. X equals negative 1 plus square root 57 over 4, and X equals negative 1 minus square root 57 over 4. All right, so let's look at this one. Let's put it in standard form. X squared plus 4x minus 20 is 0. A is 1, B is 4, and C is negative 20. Let's plug it into our formula. Negative B, negative 4, plus or minus the square root of B squared. So 4 squared times minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is negative 20, all over 2A. And A is 1. So I'm going to rewrite this as negative 4 plus or minus, get my radical ready there, and it's all going to be over 2. So in my calculator, I'm going to input everything that's under the radical, but not include the radical. So I'm going to do 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 20, and I get 96. So negative 4 plus or minus 96 over 2. Let's see if we can find the square root of 96. Nope, it's an irrational number. Let's see if we can simplify it. Square root of 96 is going to be the square root of, let's see, 96 divided by 3 is 32. So I'm going to have 3 there. 32, that just helps me remember when I write it somewhere. 32 is divisible by 2, so that's 16. 2 times 16. 16, I know, is going to be 2 times 8, which is 2 times 4, which is 2 times 2. All right, let me plug that into my calculator just to make sure. 3 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Oh, I don't know if I put enough 2s. I think I need one more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, one more times 2 is 96. All right, so I've got that set up correctly. And now I need to find some pairs to get married and move out of this house. So I've got a pair of 2s right there and a pair of 2s right there. So that's going to equal 2 times 2 radical 3 times 2, which is 4 radical 6. I hope you can see that. My 2's got married and 2 became 1. There you go. That's the first one. This is the second couple right here. They got married and became 1 right there. My lonely onlys right here stayed in the house, 3 and 2. And then I just multiplied and completed the math. So I got 4 square root of 6. So what I have over here is going to be negative 4 over 2 plus or minus 4 square root of 6 over 2. So my x is going to equal, well, what's negative 4 divided by 2? That's negative 2. And positive 4 divided by 2 is going to be, let's just do plus 4 square root of 6. And then x equals negative 2 minus 4 square root of 6. Those are my 2 answers. Now, again, these are the exact answers. If you want to find the approximate answers, just plug it into your calculator and round to the nearest tenth. Let me go ahead and switch colors so our work doesn't blend together. This is already in standard form, so that makes it easy. A equals 1, well, easier. They're all easy. B equals negative 6 and C equals 4. The more you do it, the easier it gets. So by the end of this lesson, it'll be very easy for you too. All right, so we have our formula. That's the hardest part, is memorizing the formula. I would suggest, if you haven't written it in your notes by now, which you should have because we're at the end of the lesson, you go ahead and do that. Also, remember, you get a note card at the end of the chapter. This is a formula that I would put on the note card for your end of chapter test. All right, so A equals 1, B equals negative 6, and C equals negative 4. So we have negative B. Negative of a negative 6 is going to be a positive 6. Square root, okay, since I have a negative, I need to make sure to put that in parentheses. Negative 6 squared minus 4 times A times B is, times C, not B. So let me make sure I got this right. Negative B plus or minus B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. All right, let me rewrite this. I've got 6 plus or minus. I'm going to go ahead and get my radical ready, and 2 times 1 is 2. So let's see what's in this radical. I'm going to do parentheses, open parentheses, negative 6, close parentheses, squared, minus 4 times 1 times 4, and hit enter, and I get 20. Now, 20, I happen to know, is 4 times 10. 4 is a perfect square, so I'm going to see this as 4 times 10, which the square root of 4 is 2, so it's 2 radical 10 as my reduced square root of 20. I didn't have to do the full prime factorization because I could easily find a perfect square as a factor of 20. Okay, and I know that 10 is just 2 times 5. There's no perfect squares in that. So I'm going to rewrite this as 6 plus or minus 2 radical 10. This is going to be over 2, and this is going to be over 2 as well. So 6 over 2 becomes x equals 3 plus 2 over 2 is 1. So those go away, and I'm just left with radical 10. X is also equal to, we still reduce that down to the same thing, 3. The only thing that changes is right here in the middle, our plus will become a negative, and this is going to reduce to the same thing, radical 10. So here are your exact answers for number 3. X is 3 plus radical 10, and X is 3 minus radical 10. Thank you for joining me